And welcome into our Monday edition of Heads or Tails. Bill Priestley along with Michael Rudolph. And going to look at the CPI, PPI, and kind of determine if things are in headwinds or tailwinds at this particular point. And I know we're leading off here with labor. So how are we going to look at this here, Michael?
So we talked about the labor market and kind of the slowing of the velocity of the labor market, the higher rates, right, the unemployment rate, continuing claims. We actually just got some data from monthly jobs reports for September, right? This is the headline kind of employment figure, right? And what we saw was remarkable. I mean, it trounced expectations. It was the biggest gain, at least in the headline figure, of monthly jobs since January, right? 336,000 net jobs gained.
Not a small amount.
Not a small amount by any means, and especially if you consider that the narrative of the soft landing achievable by the Federal Reserve has been kind of dwindling as this labor market has been weakening. The surprising robustness in the labor market does go a long way to kind of reassuring, I think, investors, markets, traders, that we actually still might pull this off. It's not a completely distant fantasy. Unfortunately, there is some bad news, right? If you look a little deeper into the report, right? So there are actually two surveys published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or some are calling it the Bureau of Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics. I'm not calling it that, just some are,
Well,
right?
just quote Twain, why don't we?
Floating around. So we have 336,000 net jobs gained, non-farm net jobs gained in the month of September. Great. That comes from one of two surveys in the monthly jobs report. That's the establishment survey. If we look at the household survey, which is responsible for the unemployment rate, first of all, stayed at 3.8%, despite expectations that it would drop down to 3.7%. And especially after a gain in jobs like this, you would expect the unemployment rate to fall, right? I mean, this is a huge, headline gain. Where are the unemployed people remaining? Well, there's a few differences, methodological differences between the household and establishment surveys. I think the most pressing one is that the household survey counts employed people, whereas the establishment survey just counts, jobs, no matter who they belong to,
right.
To whom they belong, rather. So,
and their surveys, too, they're not exactly counting heads in this process.
Right. I mean, there's a little bit of art and science, of both involved in getting these figures, right? Seasonal adjustments, I think, is one of the primary ones, but there are a few. And so you look at the household survey, not only did the unemployment rate remain stable at 3.8, which is, higher than it's been in quite a while, but we also look at the total, we divvy up the type of jobs gained and lost in the month. So we look at full-time jobs, right? Just people holding one full-time job in the household survey, almost 900,000 net loss in full-time jobs, right? Mm-hmm. On the flip side, you go to part-time jobs, just people working one part-time job, 1.12 million gained in the month of September, right? Now we look at multiple job holders, and this is where we kind of get a picture of how the economy is doing, right? Because if the economy is in dire straits, people take on more jobs to pay the bills, right? This is the problem with inflation to begin with. So the percent of multiple job holders, and this is people who are holding at least one full-time job, second job could be full-time, could be part-time, whatever, that's 5% right now. That's about as high as it was before the pandemic. Certainly higher than it's been in a while. But it also rose 370,000 net in September in the household survey. So we return to the headline index of 336,000, and we look at multiple job holders gained just alone, that's 370,000. So yeah. The worry is that the labor market is not as strong as it might first appear. And then one last problem with the labor figures is that in every month of 2023 so far, the headline figure has been revised lower either in the following month or two months following. So we'll see how long this kind of optimism lasts, how much optimism this inspires in markets. But for now, we should take it with a grain of salt. I mean, this is a seeming tailwind, but might end up being a headwind.
Yeah.
Very briefly, let's talk about oil.
Okay.
Do you have any?
Well, you had John Kingston, of course, has brought us those numbers last week in the employment report. And, of course, his other beat that he loves, of course, is oil. And that gets us to here.
Right. So WTI, domestic oil prices. We know that production has been slowing down. Investors' appetites has been slowing down. And what we thought was that the rally in oil prices was slowing down, right? But recently there has been a reacquaintance of this with oil prices and the fundamentals of supply and demand. It seems that global oil demand greatly outmatches available supply, thanks in part to the kind of restrictions on production cuts made by Saudi Arabia, and Russia has recently joined them. And so we saw a pretty brief resurgence in oil prices. However, it's still a recessionary environment, at least so the traders fear. So those gains are pretty unstable, right? But of course, over the weekend, we got news that there is more upset in the Middle East, right? Military actions. And so it's worth diving into the kind of geopolitical complexities around that, the major players involved, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, and Hamas. This could be another a source of upward pressure to oil prices. However, Saudi Arabia really calls the tune here, and it's really dependent on what they're going to do, right? One of the fears of this unrest is that the normalization efforts between Israel and Saudi Arabia might be jeopardized by this kind of these war actions, right? Another is that Iran, who is a member of OPEC, just with Saudi Arabia, might curb their oil exports, right? If oil prices ultimately rise, so will fuel prices, and so will, inflation again will just have its appetite refed. So we have to be on the lookout for what oil prices will do. I think preliminary, it's safe to say that Saudi Arabia is very cognizant of where these oil prices are going, and they don't want them to go too high because that will kill demand. So they're aware of that. They're going to kind of twiddle the knobs and try and find the right balance for them. But in the meantime, watch your wallets at the pump.
Yeah, absolutely. One of those worries, of course, there as well is talking with Sal Mercogliano, talking about the fact that, of course, you got Russia, Ukraine, and those tensions dealt into missiles hitting commercial ships. And if, say, Israel were to hit an Iranian oil tanker in the Mediterranean because they believe that Iran is backing Hamas, there could be much more there as well. So obviously not great news, but obviously still with jobs.
Right.
Some of them are good, possibly a tailwind, but also very possibly a headwind.
Probably a headwind.
We're going to see that as well. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. We'll take a short break and come back with more FreightWaves Now after this.